Eric the Computer Guy.
Hello, Eric the Computer Guy here. Welcome to today's video. Join me on the restoration of this Dell OptiPlex GX270. Everything from rebuilding, to driver installation, to updates, and finally, a little bit of gaming.
Chapter 1 Rebuilding.
During the reassembly, I did it outside. It was a very nice day and a lot of natural light. I ended up having to put a hard drive in this. I stole the brackets from another Dell OptiPlex. I ended up adding in official Dell memory in the 1 gig variety, and ended up struggling a little with the CMOS battery. The way it was sat in there, the clips were a bit finicky, but I did eventually get it out and put a new battery in place. On top of this, I should have removed the ribbon cable from the optical drive, which I ended up doing to get the hard drive in, but I should have just done it from the start and made it a little easier for myself. I had to use a regular ribbon cable, or IDE cable, because I didn't have a ribbon cable for it, and it makes it a bit more difficult closing this very tight chassis.
Chapter 2 First Boot and Setup.
During this stage, I'm just making sure the BIOS is properly configured with a few things set up for the OS to properly install. Once the OS is fully installed, we're going to go back into the BIOS and adjust a few other little settings that are needed for optimal performance of this hardware. As currently we are running with 1 core, 1 thread of the hyper-threaded Pentium 4 2.6 GHz under the hood, 256 megabytes of RAM because we have the OS install mode enabled so Windows XP can install without any issues on this Dell OptiPlex. Dells are very finicky from this era with the installation of an operating system. I don't know if it's just the age of them at this point or if it really was a problem with Dells of the era. As when this computer was brand new, I was 3 years old. It's at this point the installer was finishing what it was doing, and I was able to enter the BIOS, enable hyperthreading, and disable OS install mode to let Windows XP finally have access to all the RAM and an extra thread. At this point, the installer does something weird and completely skips the out-of-box experience.
Chapter 3 IOS Drivers and Updates OMI.
During this stage, I start to install the drivers that are needed to update the system from a clean install. Mainly the video driver, which is for the Intel integrated video. Then the networking driver. This is where I have a problem. The networking driver just drops the installer into a directory, and it tells you which directory to go to. Modern Windows is a bit easier to get to than this, and I was still in that mindset. But once I figured out how to get to it, the driver installed without a hiccup. After this, I move on to the chipset driver, which installed with little to no issue. Then I move on to the audio driver from a company I never even heard of. This went without a hiccup either, installing. Then it was up to the BIOS update from BIOS revision A06 to A07, fully updating the computer. This process took about half an hour to achieve. And it's around this point that I had to pause the project for about a week. The next clip is not that great. I'm gonna be honest, it is a bit darker and washed out, but I had to do a lot of correcting compensation for it due to the lighting being so bad in that clip. I installed the .NET frameworks manually, individually. I installed a few other things update-wise to Windows XP, getting it about as up-to-date as I can. And then my cat decides to make an appearance during the recording, and I had to remove her from the table and go back to the process of installing the updates. And again, this took about half an hour to achieve. I did update Internet Explorer, even though it really didn't need to, as no one's using that anymore.
Chapter 4 Gaming and Final Thoughts.
Right here, I am testing Quake 2, as this should really be about the era of games this can run with 3D acceleration with little to no issue. The graphics chip is an Intel Extreme 2, and performance-wise, 60 to 30 FPS at 1024 by 768 for a game that came out in 1997. That is fairly good for a computer like this, as I wasn't expecting this to handle anything 3D accelerated, to be quite honest. It is very loud. I will actually cut in a little bit of the audio from the recording right now. In conclusion, was this a successful restoration? Yes. The computer is fully working. It went from a machine that would only make beeping noises to a machine that can run almost anything you throw at it with some limitations right now. I do plan on adding a video card in the computer. I have a Radeon 9600 SE 128 meg low profile video card set aside for it. I just have to replace the fan. So you'll see that in a future video. On top of that, you'll also see me recapping this machine, power supply and motherboard. And then a final video where I complete a couple little upgrades. One of which being an extra gigabyte of RAM, the floppy drive cable, and hard drive cable properly installed. Finalizing the 4-part series, I guess you could call it, of the full-on restoration. And with that being said, I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.